Outlet Liquor is your place to buy a case. Stock up and save when you shop the lowest prices available every day at Outlet Liquor. You never have to wait for a sale. The more you buy, the more you save. Only at Outlet Liquor.
What's your outlet?
Welcome, everybody, to episode 121 of Two Goalies, One Mic. I am Duane Steinel, joined by my co-host, Connor Hurley. Hurls, how are you doing, buddy?
Doing well. Happy to be here.
It's been an actual episode.
Yeah, doing a while. About a week since we lost our Sabres, but middle of the NHL playoffs. We're ready to go here. Let's do this.
Absolutely. And obviously joined by the infamous Walt from the infamous SabreMetrix Twitter handle for all your analytics needs with the Charging Buffalo. He's always right there with answers to the questions that you have. And friend of the program, Ryan Drury. Drury, thanks for hopping on with us, bud. As always, it's always a pleasure to have you on with us.
100%, man. Always a pleasure to be here. And ready to chat some hockey. I'm always ready for that.
And Walt, thanks for hopping on as well.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me here.
No problem, bud. Guys, obviously a lot to really cover today. You had Kevin Adams, Granado's end of season presser. We have suspensions. We have playoff hockey being played as we speak. The Leafs get blown out in game one, which everybody in Buffalo and around the NHL love to see. Just a lot to talk about, a lot to digest. And let's just get right into it. First, we started off with Don Granado's leading off the press conference, then transitioning into Kevin Adams, who had a very heated moment with Jonathan Waro from the Associated Press. I'll start right off with you, Walt. Your initial impressions of what both Don and Kevin had to say.
I think we lost him there for a second.
I think we lost him. Do we got you, bud?
He's back.
Yeah, I'm back.
There he is. All right.
I thought the presser went great. I mean, I love hearing Granado and Adams talk. It definitely was a rough way to end the season, but I mean, I think these guys are both ready to make the push for the playoffs next year. And I don't think I have more faith in two guys more than Granado and Adams. So I think the press conference today just kind of reiterated that for me.
Ryan, obviously you are a sad Caps fan, just like us sad Sabres fans. Maybe not as sad. You had your fun runs, that's for sure. But I'll go over to Hurls. Hurls, obviously you had your opportunity to, even though over there in California, you're able to digest both press conferences. Your initial reaction.
Yeah, I listened to both of them on double speed at the end of work today, really quickly, 40 minutes each. The moment with Waro, I thought was really interesting. I thought it was, number one, pretty funny that he couldn't get his question out to both guys. Both guys asked him to repeat it. And I tried to go back and figure out the synthesis of his question. So basically he was saying that given the fact that the Sabres didn't make the playoffs, does he think that this was a lost opportunity of a season? And I think it's a question we all asked ourselves at the deadline. If Kevin Adams didn't make the moves we thought he was going to make, let's say Timo Meier or someone else, would that have been a lost opportunity if he didn't give this young group a chance to actually make the playoffs? And I guess I can ask you, Ryan, do you think Adams did enough at the deadline? Could he have done more to win that extra game? It turned out to be only 2 points and they would have made it in. Who knows how it would have shaken out at the end of the season. But was this a lost opportunity for this young, talented group to actually make the playoffs this year?
I remember doing the trade deadline episode with Duane, and I'll repeat what I said there. I really don't think so, because I think that they've built such a good young foundation here, and they have followed the blueprint of what so many model NHL franchises that have had success over the last number of years, particularly in the salary cap era, have done. They've gotten young core pieces in that they've either acquired through the draft or through savvy trades that, the Tage Thompson trade is a great example of a trade working out for both teams. I mean, Ryan O'Reilly goes to St. Louis, they win a Stanley Cup. Tage Thompson has turned into a monster for the Sabres, and it looks like he's going to be a monster for years to come. So I don't think that going out and wasting more draft capital on trying to acquire a guy like Timo Meier, who may not ultimately have helped them get into the playoffs anyway. Maybe they go get a guy like Meier or a big defenseman, and they still miss. And even if they had done that, I wouldn't have said it's a missed opportunity, given how badly run that organization has been for over a decade now. I think that this season, the biggest thing that you could take out of it, kind of similar to what's going up here in Ottawa, they brought in a lot of good young players. They seem to have a really good core to build around with those two monsters on defense in Dahlin and Power. You got Thompson, Cousins, Middlestat, who's starting to find his legs finally in the NHL down the middle. Tuck on the wing, guys like that. Like, they've got a bunch of guys that actually like to be Buffalo Sabres. And I think that is such a win for this team, because you look at the O'Reilly saga, for instance, and other guys who have been through there and didn't want to stay. Even Jeff Skinner, who's been through a lot more ugliness there than most of the guys. Like, they got a group there that seems like they like to play together and they want to be Sabres. And ultimately, I think that that's a win. So I'm not ready to say that this was a wasted opportunity. Do you want to get into the playoffs? Yeah, it's great. Everybody likes to make the playoffs. But I think that this team is set up so well and has so much good draft capital left still that I think that you can look back on this season, as much as it's disappointing to just miss. I think that there are a lot of good days ahead in Buffalo in terms of hockey right now. And ultimately, that's a positive. Like, who could say that over the last 10 plus years? I think we can say it now.
Well, your reaction to that? Did we lose him again?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the trade deadline that the Sabres had, I mean, I don't really blame too much for not going all in on some of the moves. I mean, you just look at a team like Ottawa they acquired Jacob Chikrin. I mean, he was injured for some games. They missed the playoffs. I mean, you even look at a team like Detroit and the offseason that they had, and they also finished behind the Sabres and missed the playoffs. So I don't really blame them too much for not making moves there. I think they really trust their processes. I mean, they really trust the talent they have within their system. I think that's just a great thing to see as a Sabres fan. And I mean, it's something that we haven't really experienced as a Sabres fan since like maybe 2005, 2006, where we could actually trust the pieces in the system, the pieces that are coming up. So it's a bit of a different place to be at the same time. I mean, it's great to see.
Yeah, I agree. As a Sabres fan too, just the organization as a whole, I felt it's night and day different from what it was just a few years ago. Even today, I think it was today, they announced that they're going to do a street hockey fest out at the arena. Like, they used to do that back when I was younger. They used to make boards out of bales of hay. Like, it was a lot of fun for, the younger generation of Sabre fan. And one thing I look at that, and I think that's going to do so many good away from the ice on so many different levels, because you kind of walk around Buffalo these days. You don't see a lot of fans, you see fans wearing more, McDavid jerseys, even Austin Matthews jerseys, Draisaitl jerseys, Ovechkin jerseys, more than you've ever seen before. Granted, A, yes, they're great players, but B, like, you haven't had really anything to root for here in Buffalo in over a decade. Like, what's there been to root for? Yeah, Jack Eichel was nice. Rasmus Dahlin's been nice, but did it equate to winning right away? No. It didn't. And we all know how things ended with Jack Eichel. It was ended terribly. Well, I guess, glass half full, it ended up really good for us, just the 5 years it took for us to get to this point. But Sabres fans really haven't anything to root for. But so hence why I always said, like, that's why you see so many of these younger Sabres fans. And I know a lot of them too, my friends' younger brothers, they're all, they don't follow the Sabres. They haven't followed the Sabres. They follow other teams outside our market. They are McDavid fans. They are Crosby fans. They are Ovechkin fans because of that. So I like the fact that it just isn't happening on the ice. It's happening away from the ice. The plan is to really, bring the fans back as a whole, and just the steps they're taking to do that. And I really appreciate that as a fan, just because, those were the things that really mattered to me the most. Those who know me, it wasn't just a team on the ice. It was always everything away from it. So to see Kevin Adams take those steps, just even away from the ice, to your point, Walt, I can't express enough how much I appreciate that, because it is the first time, just like you, I've had faith in this organization and its leadership in a long time.
Absolutely.
So.
Yeah. I guess another takeaway I had from today was him specifically talking about the goaltending. Obviously, I think that's the biggest source of inspiration as a fan base right now, obviously, with what we saw with Devin Levi in the last 7 games. I think we could all be in agreement that we want to see him play NHL games next season, probably start the year in the NHL. But the way that Kevin Adams talked about UPL and Comrie, he obviously has them under contract next year, so he can't go up there and railroad them. But at the same time, the way that he phrased talking about their seasons, like Comrie started off well, he got injured, and then he couldn't find a rhythm. UPL started off in the AHL, came up because of Comrie's injury, and then won 17 games for the team. Obviously, we would like a little bit more consistency. I think he is at least open to the possibility of Levi getting the large percentage of the starts next year, whether that's 45, 50 games, and then that backup spot either being a combination of Comrie and UPL, or maybe even just one of them. I don't know what you guys think about that, but the way he talked about it, I think he's at least comfortable with that notion, which I think a lot of Sabres fans would not be comfortable with that.
I'll let you start.
I was going to say, it's going to be interesting to see what they do. I mean, obviously it's a tricky situation. I mean, there's only so many goalie prospects like Levi that come around. So, I mean, you kind of want to balance it between like giving the guy enough starts versus throwing him into the fire. And I mean, that second goalie spot, obviously, I mean, with UPL, his rights will still be owned by the Sabres. Comrie's under contract another year. It's going to be interesting to see what they do for that second spot, because I'm not really sure that they're going to wait for training camp to decide who wins that second spot. Like, I feel like they may move on from whichever that third goalie is, UPL or Comrie, like during this offseason, maybe even at the draft or something. But how they decide that, I mean, it's going to be interesting. I thought that Comrie had a pretty comparable season to UPL. UPL is obviously younger. Comrie, the Sabres obviously like, because they brought him on a 2-year deal from free agency. So which one they decide to keep, I've got no idea. Whether I'd be comfortable with a Levi UPL tandem, I'd probably say so. At least more comfortable than other goalie situation this year, and that's largely due to Levi.
I agree. I know I've seen a lot of, talking heads on Twitter just kind of dismissing the idea of UPL being with the organization next year. You have to trade him. I disagree. Anyone who knows me knows I'm not a UPL stan. I'm not. There's a lot left to be desired from him. I was big on him coming out of junior. There was a lot I liked about his game, his athleticism, as a goalie. As a goalie who depended so much on my athleticism because of my lack of size. Just watching him come up from junior when we initially drafted him, and just really getting to know the goaltender. I liked him a lot, but then the biggest question mark was his health. Can he stay healthy? having double hip surgery so early in his career. If you're a goalie, you know how important your hips are to your game, and to have those lower body hip problems so early on, that was always concerning me. But this year, I think he took steps forward compared to the previous season. Again, I just don't think you win 17 games, especially on this team and how bad we were for a good chunk of the year, 5-on-5, not just defensively, our defensemen, but as a whole, 5-on-5 in the defensive zone. There were times where we were absolutely, horrific, and we still found ways to win games. Granted, yes, we were scoring, 4, 5, 6 goals a game, but there were games in there where UPL did have to make some big saves to seal those wins and get it in the garage. I would like to see what I'm not saying. Again, I'm okay with him being here, and I'm not going to cry if he's gone, but I'm not, demanding that he is gone, I guess is what I'm saying. And I think that there's still more there in his game. I've said it in the past. I think that I'm not saying that they're the same goaltender, but I could definitely see UPL being a very, very good backup, much like what Marty Baron was for Buffalo for such a long time. A guy who can go in there, in case of an injury, over between maybe 7 to 10 games and win you more than 50% of those games. That's how I look at UPL as of right now. I still think there's a little bit more there, but I think we all know, especially me and Hurls and everybody in Buffalo, whose net that is going forward, and it's Devin Levi's. But I'm also, again, not against the idea of bringing in, if they do decide to go away from what they have, bringing in a more seasoned playoff experienced veteran. I guess is what I'm saying.
I guess I was going to ask Ryan this. Like, what is the perception, like, in hockey circles around the league of the Sabres fan base after 7 games? Obviously, we've had hype for 2 years, but he came in and played really well, Devin Levi. Like, what is the perception that he can just come in next year and be the unquestioned starter as a 21, 22-year-old, his first full NHL season? Like, we're obviously very excited for what we saw. We know his athleticism. We know his profile. He's succeeded at every single level. But, like, is it wrong to place most of our trust in him to do that next season? It depends on who they get, obviously. But, like, what do you say as someone who's watched the Capitals? You live up in Ottawa. Like, are we wrong to place our trust in Devin Levi at this juncture?
That's a hard question to answer, because goaltending is such a weird position, and there's probably no more mentally taxing position in pro sports other than maybe playing quarterback than NHL goaltender, just because of the nature of the position, the physicality of it. I would say it's really up to him. Like, and you've kind of broke it down there. Like, he's succeeded, with flying colors at every level he's played at. You could make a pretty serious argument. There were a lot of guys in college hockey this year that had very good standout seasons. Nyes, Fantilli, obviously, and he's going to get drafted 2nd overall probably off the back of what he did. But Levi is right there. Like, you could make a serious case, and I read plenty of articles and heard lots of people saying that you could make a case that Levi was the best, prospect in college hockey. And I understand why. Like, the kid has all of the things that make modern NHL scouts salivate over goaltenders. He's got size. He's got really good mechanics already. Like, he already has such a calm way of moving in the net and utilizing his body to make tougher saves look very quiet and routine. Like, that's a rare thing for a guy of his age, particularly playing against a lot of older players too. It's not quite the same as Major Junior, where you're largely playing against teenagers. Like, he's playing against young men. And he's already got like such a quiet confidence about the way he moves around in the crease, controls his rebounds, makes reads. I think his puck tracking is already really, really good. I would say, though, that it's rare that guys that young can come in and be a dominant number one. Like, you probably want somebody, and maybe it could be UPL. I thought in stretches, particularly as Duane said, when the Sabres were really struggling for a stretch there from about December through to early February, where they were having a lot of trouble at 5-on-5. UPL actually turned in some pretty quality goaltending. You would probably want somebody there to back him up and take some pressure off of him. Maybe UPL can do it. You're probably not going to want to thrust like 50 plus games on the kid unless he comes out and is, storming the league like he did in his early appearances here. A 21, 22-year-old goaltender, like, coming in and having a dominant season, like, that's rare. Like, we're talking about guys like Tom Barrasso, Ken Dryden. Like, Tom Barrasso came out of high school and was electric. Like, that's so rare. Like Ken Dryden, even Vasilevsky, like early on after he took over when they got rid of Ben Bishop, when they lost in that cup final, he was 22 that following season and pretty much hit the ground running. We've seen Shesterkin and Sorokin do it recently, albeit they played pro hockey in the KHL, which, say what you want about that league, they played pro against good players. It's rare that a guy that age comes out and is just gangbusters and will win you 35, 36 games. Yeah. However, I think he has the talent to do it. I really like his game. I like how calm he is. Nothing seems to rattle him. And he's been talked about as one of the top-end blue-chip prospects in terms of goaltending for the last couple seasons. And you're starting to kind of see why.
Yeah, we had Devin Levi on this show before he made the decision to go back to Northeastern last year. Him and his teammate and best friend Justin Ritzgoian. My initial impression of him, and we've heard bits and pieces in post game and interviews and lead ups to his debut. I mean, he is everything as advertised. Obviously, we know that now, but even beforehand, just the way he talks about the game, he respects the game, he respects the position. And, his teammates would joke, while they're all out having a good time being college kids, he's back at the hotel stretching. And that's all true. Like, this kid has put in the work to be here. And he doesn't let his size be the difference for him. He's mastered his craft enough. I mean, as goalies, Connor, we've talked about this. Just watch his feet. Watch his feet. We people that say they're not sure about how he gets overly aggressive, but he needs to do that. And the great thing is his feet and his footwork and his depth control is so superb. It makes up for that aggressiveness. And eventually you hope that this team and his defensemen, for the longer they play with him, they adjust their defensive style to help compensate some of that. But I can tell you right now, this kid is everything is advertised, and mentally, that's the one thing that's impressed me most. Is not just the athleticism, the quick reflexes. It's everything up here because, as you pointed out earlier, Ryan, goaltending and, in my opinion, a pitcher are the two most mentally taxing positions in all of sports because you're on an island by yourself. You get scored on. You have a team celebrating in front of you. A goal horn going, maybe there's the red lights going off behind you, and your team gets to go to the bench and they get to, get their tires pumped back up by the coaching staff, whereas you're just there kind of on an island by yourself. Same thing goes for a pitcher. You could have a bad inning and give up 8 runs. It happens every night in baseball, every single night, and you could literally lose the game in one inning and make it almost near impossible for your team to dig themselves out of that hole. Same thing with the goaltender. And I mentally, you saw it after that Detroit game. He's flat out said it. You can't be afraid of a little adversity. And that's one of the most difficult things for a goaltender to do is never let a goal hang around. The ability to move on from even letting in a bad goal. Short memory. Those are the things that we're taught so often and early on in our careers as goaltenders. You have to have a short memory. And he does that in spades. He's just, you're never gonna have to worry about him upstairs ever.
I guess like moving forward with that though, like I think there is going to be a little bit of adversity. And let's say like that's not Comrie or UPL. Well, I'm just wondering, like, I think a lot of the conversation from a lot of Sabres fans is like, if it's not those two, like who would it be? Like, would they actually go out and get somebody in free agency? Would they make a trade? I know Varlamov has been floated around as a potential free agent addition. On this show a couple weeks ago, we talked about the possibility of a trade for a guy like Marc-Andre Fleury. I think that would be the perfect pairing with Devin Levi. It might be out of the question, but stylistically, personality wise, like it feels like that would be a really, really good fit. Who do you think, like, if they don't go with UPL or Comrie and they do decide to bring in a veteran option, like, what is the most realistic target? Like, who could we expect in the summer for the Sabres to do?
And I will start with you, Walt.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, the goalie market honestly isn't the greatest, especially with free agencies. So, I mean, maybe they consider a trade. I mean, the one, like, their biggest trade chip they have is probably UPL. And, like, the comparison that scares me with trading a guy like UPL is looking at Philip Gustafsson and the Cam Talbot trade from this past offseason, where he was a 24-year-old that struggled. Ottawa decided to move on from him and just for like a veteran option, and Talbot wasn't that great for Ottawa this season, and Gustafsson had a breakout year. So something like that is a trade I can see the Sabres making. I mean, hopefully not with the same outcome, but like where they trade a guy like UPL for a more veteran goalie. I mean, which one will be available will be interesting. I know Toronto, Samsonov, he's probably not going to be a guy they let go of, but I mean, who knows what happens if they lose this series? He didn't look that great in game one. I mean, maybe if he's a guy they could try to pry out of there with Joseph Wall, and I mean, I believe Matt Murray's still under contract for them. Maybe they try to shake things up there. That's one thing I look for. And like you said, Varlamov, obviously, I think he'd be another great choice. I think he's a guy who could play a ton of games for you. I mean, he hasn't had to do that for the Islanders as much with Sorokin coming in, but I think he's still capable of taking on a good chunk of games, even though he's been a backup. I mean, I think that's kind of the thing you're looking for with the 1A, 1B with Levi, is just some player who could take on a bunch of games if Levi goes through a slump next season.
Yeah, I see Thatcher Demko's name thrown a lot in the trade market, but he's making $5 million a year. And if Levi's your guy next year, I'm not all about like run. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not all about paying a backup goaltender to pay $5 million a year to play potentially. I mean, if push comes to shove and you run into some adversity with Levi, personally, I'd prefer to let him play through it because mentally he's a tough enough goalie to get through that type of a slump, any type of slump. But God forbid an injury. Yeah, maybe Thatcher Demko would be a good move, but I mean, I don't know. He put on very UPL-ish numbers with a very bad Vancouver team. And if we're gonna go get that guy, if we're gonna, you line them up side by side, obviously the higher ceiling 100% for me, in my opinion, is Thatcher Demko. But for that type of money, I would rather just roll the dice on UPL. That's just my opinion. I think there's, again, my opinion, there's more left to be desired. But to Connor's point, like, I think the perfect scenario in a perfect world would be a guy like Marc-Andre Fleury, who just, has literally been in every situation a goaltender can be in the National Hockey League, from being the starter to splitting time with, with Matt Murray, to being traded, to winning the Vezina and then being traded in the same season. That guy has faced so much adversity in his career, and he's always been able to, in some way, overcome it. And he's done it with a smile. And I think he would really embrace being the mentor type role. Now, that being said, the percentage chance of that happen is probably pretty low. But I agree with you on Varlamov, though. I think he would be at the top of my list if Buffalo were to go outside of what they already have, because I don't think the Islanders are going to be willing to pay him what he's going to want to be a backup goalie to Sorokin anymore.
And I guess I can ask Ryan this, like, what type of, if it's not a goalie, but like, what type of return would UPL get? Like, he's a pretty good prospect. Like, he's played NHL games. He played pretty well. Like, what would we be reasonable to expect if we were to make a UPL trade?
Yeah, it's tough to say because he's still so young, and I still think he does have a pretty high ceiling. Obviously, the health concerns. Yeah, it's a little concerning when you have two major surgeries like that young in your career. ironically, like, bringing a guy like Varlamov in, there's a guy that's had experience with that. He had horrible hip problems that really started to eat away at his career a little bit when he was still in Colorado. But keep in mind, like, that dude overcame that. Like, he had fully torn a couple tendons in his right hip, got that repaired. Remember when he first went to Colorado, like, he could not stay healthy. Like, he could not start 10 games. Like, he was getting hurt all the time. Managed to bounce back from that first hip surgery he had, and he won a Vezina. Like, he's been through it too. So he would be an interesting guy to bring in. But as far as UPL, like, it would just depend on the team you're trading him to and what you would want back. Like, are you going after a defenseman? Are you going after a forward? Is it picks? Like, I still think that he has a pretty high ceiling. I don't know that a first round pick type of return is something reasonable at this point. I would probably not say that something in the second round or someone equal to a second round type of talent or prospect is out of the question. But there's the danger, and Walt kind of brought that up. There's the danger in trading somebody like that, because currently, while we've seen some improvements this year from him and flashes of that early ceiling that people saw with him out of junior, like, he came over and played for Sudbury in the OHL here, the league I cover, and was unbelievably good. Like, he was the talk of the CHL, really. Like, everyone was like, who the hell is this Finnish kid that showed up and is dragging Sudbury, who are not exactly a model franchise, like, into contention? Then he had that unbelievable World Juniors. Like, there's the danger in trading somebody like that, right? And I know we just talked about how high we all are on Levi, but you're sitting there and kind of hoping, like, and the Philip Gustafson thing was a great point out there by Walt. Like, oh my God, like, Pierre Dorion, that actually might cost him his job. Like, that trade looks so atrociously bad that I would actually compare it, like, when you trade a guy that's that blue chip for an older guy where you're not going to get very much out of him, I would almost compare it different positions. Like, when the Caps traded Philip Forsberg for Martin Erat, I was in the mall when that happened, and I almost threw up. And Martin Erat went on and scored 2 goals, count them, 1-2 for the Caps. Like, and who cares? They went on and won the cup anyway. It doesn't matter. But, like, that's such a bad trade. And there is still a fear that if you traded UPL for what I would think is a lower end return, like, I just don't think, based on what people have seen, married with the health concerns, that he's going to bring back something super significant. Maybe if it was in some sort of a package, but again, it would really depend on what you're trying to get. I don't think the Buffalo Sabres need a center.
Nope.
So I don't think they need a defenseman unless you're going after maybe a veteran guy who's going to play in your top 4. But are you going to get somebody with a UPL type package that's going to be more impactful than what you have there? I really don't know. And then, of course, there's the danger that you trade him for a lower end return, if you will, and then he goes off somewhere else and catches fire a la Philip Gustafson. And all of a sudden you're going, oh, geez, like, maybe we should have waited on that one. Because the ideal scenario would be him and Levi both play really, really well and cause a 1-2 competition where eventually Kevin Adams is forced into a very enviable corner where he goes, geez, I think I have 2 number 1 goalies here, and I could really make some hay in a year where the Sabres are cruising and they're in like 3rd or 4th in the conference, which I don't think's far away, and it's their turn to go on a heater in the playoffs. That would be the ideal scenario. Boy, I got 2 young goalies here, and I could really, really bring in an impact piece for a playoff run. I can't accurately come up with something that would be a decent return for him right now, because I still just think he has a high ceiling and we still just don't quite know what he is as a pro. And God, you'd be scared if he went and did what Gustafson did in Minnesota, because I can tell you that Pierre Dorian is probably barfing in his office right now watching video of that kid, because that is that looks like an all-time brutal trade.
Yeah.
100% agree. Going away from the goaltending, obviously, there are positions of need in Buffalo. Obviously, center is definitely not one of them. I think that position has been well taken care of, for the foreseeable future. But Walt, we'll start with you. Like, where do you see Buffalo? Where would you want to see Buffalo try and improve this team, either via trade, free agency, or the draft? That addition and that help is already within the organization, or do you think that, even judging from your reaction to the press conferences today, that they'll go out and address maybe a blue line, a second pairing defenseman, or maybe a mid-level scoring winger?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely going to be interesting to see what they end up doing. I mean, obviously those forward spots, I think with Middlestad's end of season.
You guys there?
I think.
Yeah, we're here.
I hear you.
I don't know if it's your internet or not.
Yeah, Duane might be conking out on us a little bit.
Yeah, I was wondering if it was him or not.
It was me earlier. I guess we traded spots.
Oh, I don't hear. If you guys, I don't hear him personally.
I can't hear Duane either.
Is it me? Can you guys see me?
I see you.
Now we can.
Yeah,
you're choppy.
How are we good now?
A little bit better.
Are we good now?
It seems better.
Okay. Well, at least Walt is good. So, Walt, you continue.
Yeah,
okay.
I can hear all of you. I can hear all of you.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Guys,
so, I mean, basically. Okay. Yeah. So, basically, with the forward group, I mean, I think Middlestad's emergence towards the end of the season.
You guys keep going. I'll figure this out.
Oh, boy.
Okay.
You guys keep going. I'll figure this out.
Okay.
Does it just keep repeating?
I don't know. It sounded like the same tone 3 times, so maybe.
Yeah, me too.
So I'd say with Middlestad's emergence, I think it definitely books another forward spot, which I did not think would be filled heading into next season, because Middlestad didn't have that great of a start to the season. But, I mean, with the way he ended it, you're looking at another forward spot filled. I mean, they talked about Gergensons and Oposo. I mean, potentially bringing both of those guys back. That takes up another 2 forward spots. So you're really realistically only looking at maybe 1 forward spot, and that's if you kind of use one of Joster Greenway as a 13th forward to add this season. And do I think the Sabres do that? Maybe not, just because it doesn't seem like this team really wants to give too much term and money to older players. Maybe they add kind of a more like veteran physical presence to the bottom 6, but I can't see them really adding anything too flashy or too expensive to that forward group. And then you look at goaltending. I mean, the presser today, it looks like Levi and UPL could be a possibility. And that's another area where you're really not adding any money or any additions. So I guess you really got to focus on the defense here. And once again, with defense, I still feel like they don't have to make any major moves there. I mean, you've got Dahlin on one pair, Power on the other. Dahlin's already fantastic. Power's already really good too. He's only going to get better. So you really don't need too much more than just complementary pieces on those lines. I mean, you got Samuelson with Dahlin. So maybe that top pair is already set. So maybe your focus is on maybe a defenseman to play with Owen Power. I really like the 2 right-handed defensemen they have out in LA, Sean Walker and Matt Roy. I think those are two guys with the young pieces coming up in LA who could be pushed out of there. They're both on reasonable short-term contracts. They have a few NHL seasons under their belt in their late 20s too. So they have a little bit of a veteran presence, can bring up that average age a bit on the team. So maybe a move like that. But I mean, in terms of a big splash, I just don't think we'll see that happen this offseason. I mean, I don't think we'll see, like the Timo Meier and Chychrun trades that the Sabres run in on. I think they're going to kind of keep that same philosophy heading into this offseason where they just really trust their guys in-house. They got a lot of great prospects coming up. And they also got a lot of money to spend too in the future with those Quinn contracts. Peterka, Dahlin needs a new contract. You're going to give Power a big contract. That's going to eat up a lot of cap space. And I mean, even Devin Levi too, if he pans out, that'll eat up even more. And before you know it, all that cap space is gone. So I think Adams will be mindful of that. And I don't think he's going to get too crazy with long-term big contracts. I think he's going to keep it to a pretty simple offseason.
Yeah, I agree. I guess the defenseman discussion is somewhat dependent upon what happens with Ryan Johnson. I don't know how familiar you are with that, Ryan, but it seems like they're, at least what Kevin Adams said today, like they're still waiting on an answer. And at this point, it's been like 2.5 years. First round pick. I forget which deal it came in. That might have been the Ryan O'Reilly deal, if I'm correct there. But either way, finished his college season. They're still waiting on an answer. If he doesn't sign, I think they get a second round pick back. But either way, from what you've heard, I guess, like Ryan, what do you think potentially could happen with that Ryan Johnson situation? And if they don't, do you think that would precipitate them to eventually sign a UFA this offseason? I mean, names that I've heard come up, like Dmitry Orlov, depending on what happens with Boston, Matt Dumba, David Severson, guys like that. I think a lot of Sabres fans would want to see someone come in from outside the organization to be on that second and third pairing, to be that veteran, stay-at-home defenseman presence while also adding some offensive ability. Like, what do you think they do there to improve what was very clearly one of the biggest weaknesses of the team this year?
Yeah, that's the thing with them, right? Like Buffalo, and I agree with what Walt said. Like, I really don't think that they need to go after anybody that's super flashy in terms of high-end offensive output. Like, they have that. Like, they can score. Like, they're in that unique stage right now where we saw all the great teams of the recent past, the Pittsburghs, the Washingtons, scoring and offensive talent. Like, that's the easy part. That's the fun part. We know these guys are talented. Now they've got to focus on trying to build consistent defensive and neutral zone structure that allows them to consistently utilize those skill sets in the offensive zone. You've got to get it out of your zone first and get it down the ice before you can have fun and make all those brilliant plays and let Tage Thompson and Dylan Cousins run over people. That's their next step in their evolution, is building that consistent game-to-game structure. We saw flashes of it, particularly down the stretch. What killed them this year was that middle part, that through Christmas bit and through January into early February, where they really were having a lot of trouble keeping pucks out of their net. So I agree that offense is not the Sabres' problem at all. Like, they've got the young, talented core with some burgeoning superstars that can put the puck in the net. I don't think that they should be targeting anybody that's a big, flashy forward to come in and help. They don't need help scoring. They don't. Defensively, in terms of Johnson, he is maybe going to feel like the spots and ability for him to potentially be a star are starting to get taken away a little bit in Buffalo, because Dahlin and Power are the alpha dogs. Dahlin, I think, has fully embraced and become that first overall pick. Like, he looks, like he had some health issues down the lane, and did he wane a little bit from his hot start? Sure. But he still has the totals that he has. And man, like, he just looks like a freak. Like any NHL, if Rasmus Dahlin was a free agent, all 31 other teams would be kicking hotel room doors down to try and sign that dude. And Power's not far behind. Like, he is such a big, rangy kid that's still like he's probably got roughly 10 to 15 pounds more of muscle that he can probably add on an already pretty scary frame. Like, look, I don't like to put this kind of pressure on guys, but like, he could become like a Hedman-esque type of player where that offensive ability's there. He's got that big, long reach, and he can jump in from the point and make a nice move and make a beautiful play or take it to the net himself. And as he starts to get more of that man strength, he could be a real problem defensively for guys. Like, he's already a big and tall dude. Like, if he starts adding more mass onto that frame that he already is, he's such a good skater. He's so good on his edges. I don't want to go down the wall against that guy. I don't want to chip the puck in and go against that guy. But in terms of Johnson, like, he might look at that. And then you got Samuelson, who's locked in too. Like, him and Dahlin seem to be a pretty consistent duo. Is he going to sit there and think, you know what? I think I'm pretty talented. I think I could be a top 2 defenseman. Am I going to be able to do that in Buffalo? Maybe not. And honestly, I don't think it would be a backbreaker. Like, he's a talented player, don't get me wrong. But if he ends up leaving, and whether it's through a trade where a team's desperate to acquire his rights and Buffalo gets some hard assets, or he walks and they just get that compensatory pick, like, you've got Power and Dahlin. Like, let's not panic here, right? I do think, though, that if there was one spot that you could really look to improve, it's obviously defensively, and it could be trying to target I don't know about Orlov, like they have the money to play with. They're certainly, going to be able to afford a guy like Orlov. I obviously have plenty of good memories of Dmitry Orlov. He helped my favorite team win a Stanley Cup and likes to throw a big hit, can get involved offensively too. I don't know that he's necessarily the right guy to bring in. I like what Walt said. I mean, guys like Roy down there and Walker, like, a stout guy that's going to take care of his house first and not let guys get in tight to Levi or UPL or whoever's in net on any given night very easily. Those dudes are going to be hard to get into the paint against. And I think that's more of what the Sabres need. I love Dmitry Orlov. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, quality player. And he got off to a great start with Boston. He might help them go all the way. Who knows? I hope he does. I hope he wins another cup. Good for that kid. But I think they need kind of more of those guys with a bit more snarl that are going to just get the puck out and separate guys quickly from the puck down low and get it up to those talented forwards to go racing down the ice with. That's more the player that I would be trying to target if I was the Sabres.
For sure. Duane, you good?
Yeah, I'm sorry about that, guys. I don't know what the hell was going on.
There he is. We lost the host.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on.
We survived, though, honestly.
Yeah. Thank you, Hurls, for holding down the ship there.
All good.
Just coming in halfway into that, it seems like we're talking about, Piggy, off of what I initially asked Walt is, what needs you address, and piggybacking off what I heard from Walt and then what I heard from you, Ryan, is obviously I think that blue line finally trying to find that guy to play with Owen Power. And I kind of agree with you, Ryan, that maybe Ryan Johnson looks at the situation and sees himself, well, unless I'm playing with Owen Power in that second pairing, or somehow I'm fit into that second pairing, I don't see a situation here in Buffalo where maybe I can thrive and reach my ceiling or reach my potential. I don't know. Again, Kevin Adams has always been pretty adamant about he wants players that want to be here, and he said in the press conference that the ball is in his court, so they've made him the offer. I mean, there's only so much that you can offer him, much like they did with Levi. Levi got the max deal for an entry level deal. I'm assuming that maybe what they offered Ryan Johnson is somewhat maybe close to that. I don't know. pretty incentive based from what I remember Levi's deal was. I don't know. I definitely want to see them, though, regardless whether Ryan Johnson does or doesn't sign with Buffalo, to address, again, to what you said, Ryan, a defenseman to be the, Owen Power Samuelson, because Samuelson gave Dahlin a ton of freedom to be that first overall pick that we drafted him to be. And I think if you find that type of guy for Owen Power, you're going to see this kid really, really, really have a breakout year in his sophomore season. Again, we remember, Dahlin put on like 15 pounds his second year. I don't remember if you guys remember that picture of him playing ping pong in some random person's backyard, but he looked like Ivan Drago. Like, he put in the work away from the ice, and Owen's going to do the same thing. With his frame already, he is going to be a player that you're not going to want to go one-on-one with next season.
Yeah. I guess moving towards like the young Sabres forwards, I know Yuri Kulik was something we wanted to talk about, and I would argue that Matthew Savoie is equally as important in terms of his development and what happens this season. I saw Walt tweet something earlier today that he couldn't care less that where Savoie plays this season. And it's got to be the NHL or the WHL. I guess I'm just wondering, in terms of his development thus far, obviously 93 points in the W this season is pretty good. And he's had a really, really good junior career. I guess, like, based upon what we've seen from both of them, both Kulik and Savoie, obviously succeeding in the AHL and the WHL, like, could they be the next Quinn Peterka next season? Like, is that the projection that we're looking at for these guys? Like, I think a lot of people look at Yuri Kulik as a better version of Victor Olofsson. Obviously has a similar type shot, really good scoring ability, but he could also play more of a two-way game. So are we looking at Kulik and Savoie next season as potentially what we saw with Quinn and Peterka? What do you think about that?
I mean, I think for me, personally, I do think Kulik and Savoie, I could easily see Kulik stay in Rochester next year and Savoie in the WHL, just because, Quinn and Peterka are just a little bit older. I mean, Quinn was an older guy for his draft class. I mean, he turned 21 prior to this NHL season. And Peterka, he's the guy that's been playing pro in Germany for a few seasons. So, and he's also just turned 21 this season, just a few months later. So I think those guys have about a year on Kulik and Savoie. And Savoie is obviously in a tricky situation with his birthday. I mean, it's got to be WHL or NHL next year.
Yeah.
And for me personally, I don't see too big of a deal if he has to go back to WHL. I mean, we've seen guys like Matt Barzal go back to the WHL 2 years after his draft year, even after having a great season after his draft year. Mark Scheifele, he went back to the OHL for his draft year +2. So you're seeing guys like that go back to the CHL, and they're able to just seamlessly transition to the NHL. Like, it hasn't really affected their development. I mean, Barzal came in and had a fantastic offensive season his rookie year after spending all that time in the WHL. So I think for a guy like Savoie, I don't think it's going to hurt his development. I mean, it may actually even help his development. I think there are some things he still has to work on that he can improve on at the junior level. I mean, I do think he could be a better playmaker down there just by getting pucks inside and just utilizing his talent to its fullest ability, just because he's such a talented player that I still think there's room for him to just absolutely dominate the WHL, next season. And then you obviously get that shot to potentially make Canada's World Junior roster. I mean, you should have a pretty big role on that team despite not making the last roster. And then, just talking about a guy like Yuri Kulik, I think he probably has a better chance to crack the Sabres roster. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, there's just so few spots that will be available. But the thing with Kulik is I think you could maybe throw him on the fourth line with Okposo and Gergensons. I don't think you can say the same about a 19-year-old Savoie at this stage. But, Kulik plays with such an edge to his game. He's already got some pro hockey experience. He's not the biggest guy, but, he plays fearlessly. Almost kind of like a Peterka. just like a relentless motor, always playing hard. I mean, Kulik will be young next year, which is one of the main reasons why I still think he won't make it. I mean, he literally just turned 19 this month. Very young player for his draft class. But I mean, both guys, just in terms of talking about the future, are just going to be very fun pieces to have in the system. I mean, Savoy, I mean, the skill there is just incredible. If he can put it all together, he's going to be a really good player. Even if he doesn't put it all together, his shots developed into something else. I think he could still be a great goal scorer at the NHL level, if nothing else. And then Kulik, too. He could also shoot. He could also skate. I mean, the Sabres in the future, it's just going to be a team that could skate fast, play hard, play aggressive with just a bunch of guys that could shoot the puck. So it's going to be a fun team in the future, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Oh, did we lose him again? Can't hear you, Duane.
We might have.
I think we did. I'll pick it up. Don't worry. You figure out your internet. So you mentioned Okposo and Girgensons. I think that is a really interesting discussion. Kevin Adams mentioned it in his presser today. I'm not sure how much you know about it, Ryan, but if you do, feel free to chime in. I think it's – at least I saw a quote today saying Kevin Adams would like to re-sign them, and I sent it to a bunch of my friends, and they're all very upset. They are over Okposo and Girgensons being on this team. I think people have lasting memories of the drought, and they kind of associate Zemgus Girgensons with that, whether that's warranted or not. Like, this guy's been around since 2013. He's the longest tenured Sabre on the roster. And then Okposo, obviously, like, he's the captain, a lot of leadership in the building, but you can just see that he's a tad slower than everybody else on this team. Obviously, they play together on that fourth line, strong checking role, really good at forechecking. They, I think I saw, were top 20 in expected goals against for a line this season. So obviously pretty good results defensively. But how do we gauge bringing back that type of veteran leadership, even though they may be a little bit over the hill and you have all of these exciting young prospects, to like have opportunities for these young guys to make the roster? Like, how do you balance that type of decision if you're Don Granato and Kevin Adams? What do you think, Ryan?
Well, that's the toughest part in a way of being a general manager, right? Is who do we keep to continue to supplement and nurture, really, at the end of the day, this brilliant young core that we have. I will say that it seems like the rest of the team likes having those guys around. I would say particularly Okposo, like, even though that he has had injury issues the last number of years, has slowed down, of course he has, he's a guy that you can't ever say he cheats you for effort. Like, he goes out there and puts his body on the line every night. He blocks shots. He'll kill penalties. He'll get involved in scrums. He'll fight if he has to. Although that part of his game, you know, much like most players' games, to be perfectly frank, has kind of, you know, been left behind in his younger days, but he'll do it. Yeah. But he'll always set a physical tone. Like, he'll lay hits. He'll take a hit to make a play down low. He'll go into the corners. He's not afraid to go in for a loose puck in a corner against any defender. Like, he is a good leader, and there's still value to that in the NHL. Yeah, he can't get up and down the sheet nearly as efficiently as I would say probably most of a team. Like, he's probably the slowest skater on the team, to be perfectly frank. Yeah. But there are intangibles that guy still offers. Girgensons, I would say the same, as long as they're not, you know, quote unquote overpaying him. Like, I wouldn't want that guy making a shred over $2 million. Like, I think the 1.5 to 1.8 type of range is probably fair for him. He wins draws. Like, he's good in the dot, and he's not afraid to be physically involved either. If you were to ask me as an outsider looking in, who would I rather keep? I'd rather keep Okposo, simply because I think the little things that he does and the intangibles he still brings, and the fact that he does set that tone every night, is maybe a little more valuable. I mean, let's be honest, we are talking about fourth line players here who still need to play a role. Like, they still need to be involved, and their defensive numbers, as you mentioned, are pretty good. Yeah, that's going to be tough for Kevyn Adams to decipher. The one advantage that he has, I think, though, is that neither of them are going to cost very much money to keep around. And I think that Kyle Okposo in particular is probably in a position where he knows where he's at in his career. He's not going to come out and go, I want a 5-year deal or something. It's going to be realistic. And I think ultimately, if I'm going to predict, I think they'll probably both be back. If gun to my head, you made me choose one, I guess I would rather take Okposo. That's just my thought.
Yeah, I tend to agree, especially from a leadership standpoint. As you mentioned, like in the players in their exit interviews, Jordan Greenway, who got there 3-4 weeks ago, talked about what he's meant to him in that month, let alone like all of the guys who have spent the last 3-4 seasons with him. So I still think he does provide a lot of value with this team, and I think they both do. But like a lot of people mention even throwing Gergensons on a team like the Bruins. Like you throw him on a 4th or 3rd line checking line on a contender right now, he's exactly the type of guy you would want to play in the playoffs. Like, as you mentioned, like this team knows how to score, and they don't have many guys that have jam that can go into the corners and win a battle or play like responsibly defensively as a forward. Like, I think this team does need a lot of that. And unless you go out and like pay a good amount of money for a guy like Tyler Bertuzzi or JT Compher in the offseason or any of these UFAs, like I'm not sure you're necessarily going to replicate that type of thing with either Okposo or Gergensen. So I'm of the opinion that if they do bring them back on team-friendly deals, and it seems like guys that do want to stay there, it could be a pretty good idea. I guess looking forward for that type of thing. I mean, we've mentioned before the cap space that the Sabres have. It's a lot, but it's probably going to be very dependent upon what they do with Dahlin and Power this offseason. I think Dahlin very easily could get 8 years at $10 million per, and nobody would bat an eye. Maybe, I mean, I'm not sure in terms of the actual length of the deal, but he's going to get $10 million a season. I guess I'm wondering, I was reading an article today about what they potentially could do with Owen Power. They did those. They're looking like team-friendly deals now with Tate Thompson and Dylan Cousins. 7 years, $7 million, which are looking like bargains. And it already is for Tate Thompson, and it will be for Dylan Cousins next season. What type of contract do we envision for Owen Power this offseason? And depending on what they give him, how much cap space, like who could they potentially sign to fill out that middle six, to fill out that bottom pairing? We've mentioned Matt Roy, but in terms of forwards, I mentioned Compher and Bertuzzi, but if there's anyone else, Walt, that you've heard or you think would be good for this team moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think just in terms of those defense contracts, I do think, Dahlin will probably get something close to $10 million. I mean, the cap's gonna slowly start going up. I mean, he put up great point totals last year, and that seems to be what a lot of these contracts are based on. I mean, all situations, number one defenseman this past year. He finally became the guy we all thought he would become when they drafted him. So I think they're going to pay him whatever it costs to keep him. I mean, he's a guy they're not going to want to lose. So I think he'll probably be the biggest cap hit on the Sabres once he signs that deal. Owen Power is interesting. I think it's just largely dependent on whether Power himself wants that 7 or 8 year deal, because I think the Sabres will absolutely give it to him. I mean, if you could get Power like 7 or 8 years at like $7 million or something, I'd take that all day. I mean, I know The Athletic, they have that system where they're able to determine like the player's value, like how much value they're bringing through their results. And I think Owen Power as a 19-year-old defenseman is already at like 6-something million, which is pretty remarkable. So he's only going to get better. So I think if you could lock Power up like 7 or 8 years and keep it under like 8 million, I mean, I'd take that all day if you could get that done. And then in terms of forwards, I mean, I love JT Compher. I mean, I loved him when the Sabres drafted him. He was like the one player I was a little sad to see go away in the O'Reilly trade, and he's really become exactly what Sabres fans thought he would become when he made it to the NHL. I mean, he's been one of the best defensive forwards in the NHL these past few years. just a guy that plays hard, is a great motor. If the Sabres can add a guy like him, I mean, I'd definitely go for it. I just think he adds that like defensive presence in the middle of the lineup, can help maybe stretch a few Sabres lines out. I mean, he's not going to kill the offense either. He's a like defensive forward that can contribute on both sides of the ice. So if you can add him, I'd do it. I think the question with him is just whether or not the Sabres will do it. I mean, they seem to really adhere to the idea to keep the high cap hits to like their younger players and keep it in house. So with a guy like Comfer, who's 27 years old, I'm just wondering how much term they'd be willing to offer him. But I mean, he's a guy who personally I'd love to add to this group, just because I think he really would help the Sabres with what they struggle at. And I really think he could carry in some of those young guys into a bit of those two-way roles, or even cover for them defensively while they do their things offensively. So I'm a big proponent of adding Comfer this season if the cost is reasonable.
Yeah. I mean, having him in the building, I mean, albeit pretty briefly, I think would be great. Duane, we got you?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
Thank
Seems
God.
we do.
All
right. Take 3, Duane.
Take 3. Here we go. All right. I'm gonna quit if we can't get this done with me. But no, to Wade, to Walt's point, I was very sad to see JT Compher as part of the Ryan O'Reilly trade. I've always thought he was drew a lot of comparisons to Chris Drury coming out of college. I think he's a poor man's version of Ryan O'Reilly. I've always liked his game. Again, a guy I just did not like to see, kind of weaved into that Ryan O'Reilly trade. But to also to Walt's point, I would love that. That is a guy who I think you can fit into your bottom 6 that would really, improve your team defensively 5-on-5. Such a great 200-foot hockey player and very high hockey IQ. Something this team could really use, again, especially in the defensive zone.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess moving forward for next season, I'm not sure what the point projection for this year was. I think it was around 82, 83. They ended up getting 91. I guess, like, from an outside perspective, like, Ryan, what do you think a reasonable expectation for the Sabres next season is? It really depends on what happens this summer and how they develop. But the trajectory that this team is on, I think Kevin and Don talked about it today in their end of the season press conference. Like, the expectation from here on out is to make the playoffs. And I think for all of us, of course, we want to see them make the playoffs. But, like, I think it would be wrong of us to just be happy with a first-round exit or a 4-1, 4-2, just get in and not really perform that well. Like, where could this team feasibly go next season in the next couple of seasons? I think we all know in 3 to 4 years they should be a perennial cup contender if the projections pan out based upon this rebuild and the superstars that they have up and down the lineup. But, like, next season and maybe even the season thereafter, like, what can we expect from this group?
One quick point before we – oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Duane.
No, one quick point before JT Compher, also a former student of Don Granato with the NTDP. Just throwing that out there.
Bring him in.
It's worth saying. And hey, personal connections like that in a game like hockey, it's a super small world. They go a long way. I think that he'd be a reasonable target. You know who else? A little older, and I don't know, just based on the way he played this season in particular after a down year, I don't know if he'd necessarily be in the Sabres price range, but if they could get him, another guy that's a UFA this year that would look pretty good and probably bring a lot to this lineup. Alex Killorn's a free agent this year. Like, I don't know how realistic that is. He'll be 33. I don't know what kind of money he's going to want. Is he like a $5 million plus guy? I don't know. Maybe that scares a team like the Sabres away a little bit, depending on the term. But even if he was a guy, maybe like just as an example that said, like, give me a 2-year, $10 million deal, even if it was around that 5, I would actually probably do it. Like, that guy's done everything and he is as gritty as it gets. Like, he is such a pest. and he's got a lot of skill, can kill penalties, and he's still like, despite, aging a little bit now, he's into his low 30s. He can still fly out there, man. He was flying in game 1 against Toronto. Like, he's still got great wheels, and everybody knows that he's willing to do anything to win. So he'd be an interesting target potentially too. As far as realistic expectations, like if everything continues to pan out and they continue to follow that, tried and true trajectory of building up the good young talent base. Now we're into that stage where we're figuring our goaltending out, supplementing the young core with veteran guys like Killorn, like Orlov, like Roy, like Walker, the guys that we've brought up in this episode. If everything continues to pan out, Levi hits the ground running again, UPL factors in, I don't think it's unrealistic to expect somewhere between 96 to 100 points, and they get in as a wild card team, which they were pushing to do this year. I think the upper echelon of the conference will still be really tough for them to overcome. I think it's reasonable to expect Boston will do what people thought they'd do this year and fall back. I think Patrice Bergeron will retire. I think David Krejci will retire. It will set them back a little bit, and I still don't think they'll miss the playoffs next year, but they will come down. Florida is in a weird position. Like, I don't love what I've seen out of them, this year. So like there's going to be some room for the Sabres to make some noise. And then you look over in the Metro where the Islanders are still a pretty old team and are going to get another year older. They'll still be good, but another year older. Are the Devils going to have a setback and take a step backwards? Are the Rangers going to continue to go on their upward trajectory? It's hard to say. I think that there's going to be room. Obviously, I don't think Pittsburgh, Washington are a factor anymore. So I think that they are in really good position next year based on the way that they showed that they can play and the talent that's available to them. I think that I would say if they couldn't at least snag a wild card next year, I'd be a little disappointed in that. In terms of the year after, I guess it would really depend on how next year goes. But if you're following that trajectory of recent teams that have bottomed out, brought that young talent in, I think you're right. Over the next 5 years or so, I think it's not unreasonable to expect that they become a consistent playoff team. And in those 3, 4, 5 years, become a consistent cup contender where they're going all in at the trade deadline, where they're trading away first round picks to bring in player X that gets them over the hump into the second or third round. That's what I think. Honestly, too, if they make the playoffs next year, which I think is a reasonable expectation, they have the talent to potentially be a first round upset. I think that they could upset somebody because they're so skilled and their best players are all big, snarly bastards that are not fun to play against. Cousins and Thompson and Tuck out there running over people. Dahlin running all over the blue line. Like, if they get into the playoffs next year, they could absolutely upset somebody. They'll be an underdog, barring them having an incredible season and just putting their foot all the way to the floor in fifth gear. But I would say, based on what we saw, they'd be an underdog. They could absolutely be an upset team. They have the talent to do it. They could absolutely outscore somebody and sneak a 7-gamer out of somebody 100%. I think it would be reasonable to expect that they're a wild card team.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, even on the run they were on at the end of this season, I thought if they did sneak in and they caught lightning in a bottle with Levi the way he was playing, like he would have started game 1 of the playoffs.
100%.
Which is crazy to think about. Crazy to think about, but like if they continue that run, let's say they eventually play Boston, like I think they could have snuck a game or two in there. I don't think any expectation that the Sabres could have won a 7-game series against the Bruins. That just was never going to happen.
It's free hockey. If they would have found a way to snuck in this, that's free hockey, right? Like that's like
free hockey. But I think
nobody in their right mind would have expected the team on paper we were starting the season with
No,
to make it to
absolutely
the playoffs. Optimistic that you might be competing maybe 5, 6, 7 points out of a wild card spot, which I think many might have been optimistic about, but no way I thought if you were to pull Sabres fans or Sabres talking heads to start the season, do you think this is a playoff team? I'd say the majority of them probably say no. But next year, absolutely. I think this to Drury's point. I think up and down this roster, if everybody that you expect to progress and take the next step does so and takes that next step, and your role players this season continue to be those players, granted they stay healthy, 100%. I think this is a team that could, I'm not gonna say make a deep playoff run, but could definitely pull off an upset or two.
Yeah, for sure. I guess in terms of what you believe, I actually really latched down to a couple of your tweets, both the Devils night and maybe one other that like we should be more upset about losing these big games, whether it be the Panthers game a couple weeks ago or it was the Devils game. We should be more upset about it, but we should be so excited about the future. Like Devin Levi is so good. This team is going to be good for a really long time. Like, what do you think about next season? Like, we don't know exactly what this team is going to look like, but like, what is a reasonable expectation for what we should think about the Sabres next season?
I mean, for me personally, I always go back to like those teams growing up, like the 05, 06, 06, 07 teams, and how that 05, 06 team obviously had the talent. They can never really get it done. And I mean, obviously the lockout season before that, but then all those pieces came together, all those young guys came up, and they just went on to have a pretty decent regular season. I think they're the 4th or 5th seed, and then they go on and win 2 playoff series, just playing that like young, exciting, ton of offense brand of hockey. So, I mean, for me, that's like probably like the top of my expectations right there is, I mean, kind of like that 05, 06 type season where they play well enough in the regular season to get comfortably in the playoffs, and then they just use those young legs once they get there to mess around and win a playoff series or two.
You absolutely have the potential to have that same type of depth, right? Like maybe not be as strong. I shouldn't even say be as strong on the blue line because I think they have 3 incredible defensemen in Dahlin, Power, and Samuelsson, but a very similar blueprint. And I've always said over the past couple of years that you look at the blueprint teams. What's the one thing they all have in common? The Chicago Cup teams, Pittsburgh, Tampa, depth down the middle. They have so much depth down the middle. And now Buffalo, after years of not having that, just like we haven't had a goaltender, we finally have that depth down the middle. You've taken your last in 2 years, you've drafted in the first round 5 times. 4 of those picks, centerman. You already had Cousins coming in. You made the switch to Tage Thompson at center, which has been a godsend for his game. And then Casey Middlestat, a guy who honestly, and I've said this again, not to repeat myself a bunch of times, is you really find out who a player is when their back is up against the wall. Much like a goaltender, when your back is up against your wall, you find out who a player really is. Casey Middlestat coming into this season, there were no guarantees for him. He's not stupid. He knows what's coming up. He's seen how Kevin Adams is drafted. He knows the youth movement that's coming. He knows this was a put up or shut up season for him. And he came out and he performed very, very well. Yeah, you had a couple, dry spells, I guess you'd call it, during the season, but he was able to make a lot of doubters and haters, shut their mouths and accept that maybe he won't live up to that 8th overall pick. Maybe not, but he's a 60-plus points player, I think, for this team going at least for next season. And depending on how Kevin Adams uses it, it sounds like he's, in the long-term plans as well. They lock him up. You're looking at the depth down the middle, whether your centers are Tage, Cousins, and Casey, or Tage, Cousins, and Krebs. I tend to lean more towards Casey because that's where he's played his best. Down the middle, you are set now for a while. And that is the one thing next to Devin Levi that I'm the most excited about, because having 3 centers that can drive lines and score is something we haven't seen in here in almost a decade.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy to think about.
One thing I'll say about Casey Middlestat quickly is if he just continues to be a solid player, responsible in his own zone, wins draws, and contributes on what will probably largely end up being that second power play unit where he'll have free reign to do his thing for a lot of years, and keeps chipping in those top 9-esque points, I think that he will live up to being an 8th overall pick. Like, I think people get caught a lot up in, oh, this guy was a top 10 pick, so he should have X amount of points, like this guy who was drafted in a similar slot. That's just not feasible to expect for guys to develop. Like, as an example, like, look at a guy that's playing in the playoffs again right now, not very happy after the first game, but like, look at Luke Shen. Luke Shen was a 5th overall pick. And I think when the Leafs drafted him, they knew he was never going to be like a 70-point defenseman, but they knew that he was going to turn into, and eventually did turn into, a really stout defender who would mash people into the boards, constantly leads the league in hits, and ended up being a pretty solid contributor to some cup runs. Like, if you are drafted anywhere in the NHL draft and you become an easy name for a coach to pencil into a lineup, you're a success. This is the hardest league to play in the world. And no, Casey Middlestat may never turn into that 80-point guy that people thought he would maybe turn into based on the skills he showed when he was drafted that year. But if he's a guy that's penciled into the lineup every night and positively contributes to this team's upward trajectory, he is a successful pick. Do you know how many guys are drafted in the first round every year that never play?
Yeah.
It doesn't happen as often now, but like, there are guys that just get drafted in the first round and just never figure it out, and they never play. I would say, based on what he did this year, setting himself up for a pretty lengthy NHL career, which is a success in my opinion.
Yeah, I'd say so too. I mean, like, he put on a lot of muscle mass. Like, you can tell that he's not getting pushed off the puck anymore, which
the kid showed up.
Yeah,
he showed up.
Like, the same thing with Dahlin. Like, in his first couple seasons, he was pushed around. Like, he was this skinny kid from Sweden who had a lot of skill, obviously, but now he's a bona fide number 1 NHL defenseman.
People were freaking out about him, man.
I know. And
people were like, oh my God, what a bust.
Especially
what
his
a terrible
game.
number 1 pick. And
especially his defensive game. Like, he was irresponsible in his own zone, but at the same time, like, he was 18 years old and still learning how to play. Yeah.
Kid can't drink.
I know.
He couldn't even drink. He couldn't go to a bar and order a beer.
Yeah.
And people are like, this guy sucks. What a waste of time.
I mean,
it's like,
Twitter.
Relax for a sec.
It's going to happen. But with Middlestat, I think even this past month, you put him with Tuck and Skinner, and you see what he can do when he's around guys that can finish. Like, his chemistry. His chemistry with Jeff Skinner is. You even saw it in the last game against the Blue Jackets. Like, it's really, really remarkable. If you put those two skill sets together. So I think that. Yeah, it's someone we forget about and someone like we've consistently gotten upset with over the past like 3 to 4 years, but like for no real good reason. Like, the kid is very young. He's obviously very small. And like we said, 60, 70 points is not an unreasonable expectation for him moving forward.
It can't be understated either. Or, for the fact that you have a guy in your lineup who will probably slot in as your third line center, who can make that jump to your first line, and that line doesn't really, I shouldn't say miss a beat, because when Tage, Skinner, and Tuck are clicking, they're a top 3 line in the National Hockey League. But the fact that they're still producing at the click they were, and it's your third line, probably realistically your third line center, that is such a value to any hockey team, any team. And going back to that 05, those Sabres teams from 05 to 07, Derek Roy was your third line center. Derek Roy,
100%.
Vanek and Max were his wingers. Find him those types of guys. He's shown that he can produce if you get him talent on both sides. Find him that talent, whether it's internally or you go out and you find it somewhere else, and you have a very dangerous top 3 lines, in my opinion. And one last point on Casey Middlestat. I forget which game it was, to that point about him putting on size, because I thought that was always, it was never the skill with him, the shot. He always had that. It was just, I always felt that Casey wasn't putting the work in away from the ice. He was always coming in to camp at the same weight. If you really want to go as deep as looking at his Instagram pictures and stuff like that, he was the same size guy coming into camp almost every year. Like that drove me nuts. Diet, do what you had to do to put the size on and make yourself a better version of yourself, a better, more competitive NHL hockey player. But he did that this year, and I think one of the best examples of it came here at the end of the season. I forget which game it was, but it was on a Henry Jokiharju goal. The puck is on the boards, and he goes in. He's the first Sabre in there, a couple opposing players, and he battled for about 5 seconds, and he came out of that battle with the puck. And it's not like he just kind of hung around the outside of the boards waiting for a puck. He went in there and he fought for it, came out with it, kicked the puck out to Henry Jokiharju. It was a funky goal. I think it was deflected and found its way to the net. But that's just a perfect example. Like, those are the strides and the steps that Casey Middlestat made this season that made him the player he is now. The little things that he wasn't doing beforehand. And that's why I think that Kevyn Adams he speaks so highly of him, and he's definitely in the plans for the future beyond next season, which I think is the last year of his deal.
I mean, this is the same kid that couldn't do a pull-up at the combine. So if you start,
which is a bullshit, stupid thing to like. That's combines are the most useless at any sport, NFL, NBA. They're junk.
Jamarcus Russell threw 80 yards from one knee. That's all you need to know.
Good for Jamarcus Russell. God bless him.
You guys ever hear that story? I'm not sure if it was true.
They made him get on his knees and throw it 80 yards. It was insane.
No. The one story is that the Raiders gave him a blank tape. Like, it was like, here's film. There was nothing on it. Because they suspected that he wasn't watching film, and they gave him this tape of film, and then they asked him later on what was on the film, and he actually went into detailed explanation of what he saw, and they all know, like, yeah, there was nothing on there, man.
I heard
that. I don't know if it's true, but I heard that from a couple different people, and if that's true, that's outrageous.
Yeah,
that's bad news, Bears. Like, combines just mean absolutely nothing to me. Ultimately, like, yeah, you want guys to be in shape. It's great you're in shape, but like, I just don't care. Yeah. Like, the ultimate combine breaker, different sport, is Tom Brady. The combine, it does, like, it matters not at all to me. Like, if a guy that my team drafted, like, finished first in all the fitness tests, I'm like, oh, great. That guy can run a marathon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like, it means nothing to me that this guy could do 60 pull-ups and Casey Middlestat couldn't do one. It doesn't mean that the guy that did 60 is a smarter hockey player, a more efficient hockey player, a more dedicated hockey player. It means he's jacked. Good for you. Doesn't mean you're going to make a play for me in the Stanley Cup final when the game's on the line over Casey Middlestat, as an example.
Yeah.
I just don't care. Like, the combine, nonsense. Couldn't give a shit.
It's the picture people think of when we think of, like, him underperforming in his first 2 years.
Oh, I know.
Like, yeah.
We're like, look at the kid.
He
can't do a pull-up.
The cool part about that is, like, he's proven people wrong. Like,
100%.
Every Sabres fan that I've talked to this season did not expect anything from him. And these past 2 months were remarkable. So, like you said, the center depth, like, the fact that the Sabres have, depending on what happens with Okposo and Girgensons, I mean, 4 pretty solid centers up and down the lineup. They haven't had that, obviously, in 13 years. So, moving forward, that's just such an amazing thing to have. And they'll round it out in the middle 6 and the bottom 6 and see what happens with the third pairing. But like we've talked about, this team is set up for a really long time. So it's pretty amazing.
I think it's just the picture itself is so funny.
It's so funny.
Like, how much he's struggling. So funny. I think that's the most polarizing part about it. It's just such a funny picture. Like me, during COVID,
I can't do a pull-up.
I don't think I could.
During COVID, I put on like 25 pounds, and there's no way I can do a pull-up right now.
He looks so different too. He's so young. Oh, it's the Home Alone picture. That's the thing.
Oh, wow.
I've never seen that GIF before. That's fantastic.
Like
brutal, man.
it's so lame. Like, because it's just like what I said with most combines. None of the like, again, it's great to know someone's in shape. Like, but that's like starting your car. That's like step one.
Yeah.
You're an athlete. Like, of course, I just bare minimum expect you're in shape. Like, when I get in my car and turn the key, I expect it to just turn on. Like, it's so dumb. Even like the NFL, like they do, like people lose it over like the vert test and the guys that can jump. And like they have like linemen doing it. And it's like, I don't give a shit that the center I drafted can jump 1.5 feet off the ground. Can he block the quarterback?
Yep.
Is this guy smart enough to block complex defensive line schemes with linebackers coming in too on blitzes and pick up the right guy and let my quarterback make a throw? Like, I don't care how high he can jump. Even defensive backs who you want to be able to jump high. I don't care if a guy can jump really high if he can't read a route and stick with a wide receiver. Who cares that you can jump higher than everybody else? If you can't stick with a guy, have good gap control, and not, especially in nowadays game, not take a defensive pass interference call every single play, what the hell does it matter that you can jump 3.5 feet in the air? I don't give a damn. No, it's like so dumb. I actually get so mad because it's just like, who cares about this stuff? Yeah. Oh, this guy made a VO2. He did so good on the VO2 bike. Neat. Can he make a play for me in the Stanley Cup final in Game 7 in double overtime?
Yeah.
I just don't care. I don't care. I think it's so dumb.
No, I'm with you. I mean, the NFL draft is coming up. Like, well, let's just jump into it. I've got a lot of a lot of Bills takes that I've been looking
the NFL draft is so meaningless.
I don't know if we want to start that on this show.
No, I mean, I would love to.
And start pitting Sabres and Bills Twitter against
that's for another time.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm good, Duane. I don't know if you've got anything else, but
I definitely want to get out of here. I'm enjoying the conversation, but obviously, first 2 nights of the Stanley Cup playoffs are in the books. The Toronto Maple Leafs absolutely got blown away by the Tampa Bay Lightning, 7-3, which I had a lot of fun with last night. That was fantastic. And this just in from Michael Russo out of Minnesota. Marc-Andre Fleury starting Game 2. Yeah, he was the first one on the ice for warm-ups and last one off, and obviously that's the indicator of who's starting. And I guess he was wearing his gold game pads, which leads them to believe that he is starting for the night, which could make sense, obviously, because double overtime. That's a lot of hockey with less than 24 hours rest in between, and it's not like Marc-Andre Fleury isn't fit to be put in this position. That's why you have him here. You know what I mean? For this situation exactly. So Flower getting the start in Game 2 for Minnesota. But just to touch on the first 2 nights of playoff hockey that you guys have seen so far, your takeaway from it and how exciting it's been.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it definitely hurts not seeing the Sabres in the playoffs, but I mean, I definitely don't think they're too far off compared to some of the teams we've been watching. I mean, it's a playoffs where like it's expected to kind of be like chalk throughout. Like it's everybody is like thinking that the cup final is going to be Bruins Oilers. And I thought it was pretty neat to see like the Oilers lose that first game in overtime. I mean, kind of throw things into a mix. Even see like Seattle play the way they did. I mean, I'm really just hoping for some chaos this playoffs. I want to see some teams go far that usually don't go too far, and hopefully see a team win the cup that hasn't won the cup yet. I think that would be pretty cool too.
Yeah, you kind of go into these playoffs. You almost kind of pencil in the Bruins, as the team that's going to be coming out of the East. top to bottom. That team is just fantastic. I think that, you see it a lot on hockey Twitter, Leafs Twitter. I think that at least from fan standpoint, maybe they were taking, many assume that, this would be the year that Toronto would finally get over the hump in the first round. And if they do, good for them. As much as I love ripping on Leafs fans, I totally can empathize with the struggle, because we've been through it here in Buffalo with both teams for such a long time. And but it's so fun to see them just get shit on the way they did last night, in the fashion that it happened. Unfortunately, Saranac and Hedman doesn't look like they're going to be able to go for game 2. Bunting getting hit with the 3-game suspension. So I think that series, potentially could go, 6 or 7 games. A lot of exciting hockey so far, especially in the East. And I guess I'm not really too sure. I have Boston penciled in coming out of the East, but I really think it's anybody's game in West. I think there's really no clear as day front runner. You'd love to say Edmonton, but they lose game 1 the way they did, 3-2 in overtime. I really think it's anybody's ball game.
I agree. Yeah, I think that the West is definitely wide open. They lost game 1. I still like Dallas. Like, there's something about the Stars and Ottinger and that decor they have, and they turn into different guys in the playoffs. And I hope Joe Pavelski's okay. Obviously, I like Dallas quite a bit, and I like Edmonton still too. Like, I just think that they learned a lot last year. They went on a really deep run that ended, in a way that they didn't want it to. Obviously, I think McDavid's as hungry as any superstar we've ever seen to succeed. And he's got the legacy of greatness behind him. He's trying to revive those wild Oilers days of old that took a long time to come back, much like what Buffalo's coming out of now. Like that period in Edmonton was, that was gross to watch. Especially for a market like that just loves hockey. In terms of the Leafs, I still think they're going to win this series. Like, they have to, man. Like, come on here. Like, what else can happen? And I'll say this too, like, a lot of people are making a lot about the refs, and look, I'm one of the biggest ref noisemakers out there. Like, at least I used to be. Like, dude, everything was the ref's fault. When you lose, it's like the easiest thing. Oh, well, especially on a night, right, where like the other team has more power plays. It's like the refs hate us. The fix is in. They hate us, right? Like, dude, I had to watch my team lose constantly to Sidney Crosby, the golden child, the good Canadian boy. And I was right there on the front of Conspiracy Avenue. They don't want Ovechkin to win because he's Russian. They can't have this Russian guy beat good Canadian Sid. It's just like such horse shit. Like, at the end of the day, when you win, and no playoff journey's the same, but every playoff journey has some adversity in it. And you know what? The people that win Stanley Cups, they just persevere. The refs are shitty all the time. They're always shitty. And I disagree with Gary Bettman. I don't think they have the best officials in professional sports. They just plain don't. Mm-hmm. But you know what? The teams that won Stanley Cups, they had bad calls. Dude, today, I had a guy who I'm friends with today, like, oh my God, the Leafs, they got hosed last night. And yeah, like, it's funny because they're all going, oh, we deserved to lose, but the refs ruined the game. And I'm like, well, that's like, that doesn't make sense. The refs ruined the game, but you deserve to lose. Like, which is it? Because everyone is pointing to 3-0 after the first. Like, they were gross. Like, they get scored on a minute and a half in. Like, Corey Perry, God love him, he cannot go out there on the first shift and run your show and make a goal happen on home ice. What are you doing?
I've said it. I think the Leafs I'm sorry. I think that Tampa Bay Lightning are more built for the first round than the Leafs are. Everybody knows who watches hockey long enough knows the first round is brutalizing. It's physical.
It is. It is.
You know, you're going to go through pain, especially if you go 7 games. And that's where guys like Corey Perry and Pat Maroon are very, very valuable. That's why they're there, because they play that style of hockey. They play that, you know, in your face, you know, meet me on the boards type of hockey. And that's so valuable in the playoffs. Like, you know, with Tom Wilson. I'm
glad you brought up Tom Wilson.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you brought him up, because people are losing it about this Michael Bunting thing. And that's what everybody said last night. 3-0 after the first, boot off the ice, junk. Then they get 2 power plays and they score. They make it 3-2. And then people are going, oh, well, then the refs took their momentum away. Because, and I'll say this, the call on Kampf, the slash on Perry, yeah, I thought that was a dog shit call.
Mm-hmm.
Every team that wins has dog shit calls. Maybe kill it. Maybe don't let Nikita Kucherov snipe one with nobody within 10 feet of him with 3 seconds left in the first on the power play. Everyone knows where he sets up. Maybe kill this one. Yeah, it's a bad call. Even then, bad call, fine. The refs hate us. Great. It's 4-2. And then Bunting goes and does one of the stupidest things you could ever do in a game like that. Look, it's 4-2. You have 3 guys on that team that are 3 of the best offensive players in the league that make over $10 million. 2 of them make over 11. A 2-goal deficit is too much for you? That's insurmountable.
Yeah.
Really. With all the talent on that team, 2 goals is too many, eh? And then Bunting goes out there and does that. And I said to my friend today, who was like, oh, well, you know, and it didn't matter that Bunting did that. Yeah, it screwed them, but the game was over. The game was over? There was 6:20 on the clock when Bunting took that penalty, if I'm not mistaken.
In the second period, yep.
And then a whole third period, down 2. The game was over. If true, pack it up. Fold this franchise.
That's loser mentality.
Fold the franchise. 2 goals is insurmountable. Really. Yeah. And then Bunting does that. Now people are like, oh, he got 3 games. When the Caps won, and it's the easiest thing for me to reference because I paid, obviously, quite close attention to that run. Tom Wilson got suspended for 3 games to finish out the Pittsburgh series. He didn't play the rest of the series because he took Zach Aston-Reese's jaw off. Like, literally broke his jaw. And he got suspended for 3 games. I was apoplectic. I was so mad. But, like, you look at the hit. Go on YouTube right now if you don't know what I'm talking about. He just brutalizes this poor kid, man. Like, he killed him.
I remember.
You know what happened? The Caps won. That missing their number 1 right winger, who plays on the number 1 power play unit, the number 1 penalty kill unit, and game 5 of that series against Pittsburgh, Nicholas Backstrom didn't play. He had a broken hand that he played through the rest of the playoffs and the cup final. He had a wonky hand. Number 1 center out for game 5, number 1 right winger out for all 3 of the final games. They won them. They won. Figure it out. If Michael Bunting being out of the lineup for 3 games or being down 2 goals on home ice is insurmountable for you, pack it up. Put your Lunchables in your backpack and go to school. It's over. If that's insurmountable for you, it's over. Dunk your cookies in your milk and get Nana to tuck you in. Go to bed.
I hope they lose just because I'm going to have you.
No, it's unacceptable to me that people are like, oh, the game was already over. The game was over. Down 2. Momentum. People, momentum. Oh, they took our momentum.
I know,
dude.
You gotta clip this. This is fantastic,
Dude.
And
I'm
again,
gonna
have you on, I'll hang up and listen. The night they
I can't do it. I'll have a heart attack. I'm not even a fan of the team. And again, I want to reiterate, this is coming from somebody who constantly had to watch my favorite player, lose to Sidney Crosby, to the Rangers, to Montreal that year, the 8th seed. I almost puked. That was gross. We won the President's Trophy and got shellacked. We were the first team to ever be shellacked. I had to watch all of that. And at the time, as a teenager going, the refs screwed us. We lost because the refs. We didn't lose because the refs. We lost because we could not overcome adversity and we were not ready for the smoke. And then eventually they found a way to win. Dude, the cap, keep this in mind. Washington went into that playoffs that year. Braden Holtby wasn't the starter. Philip Grubauer started the first 2 games. They lost game 2 in double overtime. I'll never forget it. Panarin went bar south on the backhand. I was like, I almost pissed my pants. I was so mad because I was like, they're doing it to me again. They're down 2-0 to Columbus. They won the next 4 games. And then they beat the ultimate dragon, Pittsburgh. And you know who they beat in the conference final? Andrei Vasilevsky and the Tampa Bay Lightning. And then they dusted Vegas off. They gave them a game. That was nice of them. And then they dusted off Vegas and they won the Stanley Cup. Tom Wilson suspension.
The
summer of Ovi was great. I had a great time. I got a tattoo. It was great. Wilson suspended. Backstrom hurt. Kuznetsov got knocked out of game 3 of the Cup final, and Eller had to center the top line. Lost the first 2 games at home. Like, don't talk to me about momentum and refs stealing our momentum. You've got 3 guys making over $10 million. You're a damn good team, and I still think they'll win this series. Go get it back. Don't sit there to me and say, the momentum. Yeah, and you're at home controlling the matchups. They stole our momentum. Jesus Christ. I can't do it anymore with these guys, man. Like, it's so embarrassing.
I personally
the refs hate us.
I really hope
the refs hate us.
It's just,
does anyone else
I just think that Toronto Maple Leafs fans are some of the most entitled bunch of hockey fans in the hockey.
They're the Yankees of hockey.
Yeah, exactly.
No, they're not, because the Yankees win.
They actually won. Yeah,
it's true.
No, they haven't won since 2009, but still, right? It was in color at least.
27 times.
27 times.
Yeah.
Look, they're a great fan base. Yet you have to be to put up with this pain. Yeah. Oh, the God Almighty! You are in a similar position, guys. Like, in terms of the Bills, 4 Super Bowls. Like, oh my God! How do you?
He's double gripping the mic, man. Look, dude! I feel like you're the lead singer of Rage Against the Machine as you're
even right
Zach
now.
De La Roca, yeah. It's just come on. How
right now
the pain.
Yeah. I'm with you.
How do you do it? You show up, right?
It's where you're from. It's a source of pride. You've done it your whole life, and I understand why Leafs fans do it. And you probably did it with the Capitals up until they won, and we're gonna do it with the Sabres. People have been comparing the Sabres last 17 years to the Leafs last 17 years. They've made the playoffs 12 of those 17. The Sabres have made it 3 or 4 times. Conference finals appearance, haven't made it in 12 years. What would you rather have? Not making it out of the first round in 17 years, or those 2 or 3 runs the Sabres had?
What's the difference?
In 05 or 06? At the end of the day, there's no difference. But I almost would rather
I know what you mean. I
almost would rather have the dark despair of 2 or 3 rebuilds and tanking for Eichel and it not working out, and not really having the hope that Leafs fans have, because it gets crumbled every single year, as we saw last night. So I get what you mean. Like,
the despair is very comparable.
Yeah,
I understand exactly what you mean by that. The last thing I'll say is this, and it's why they keep coming back. The Chicago Cubs didn't win a championship. I can't even believe this is real. For 108 years. That's like 5 or 6 generations of fans that didn't, many of them not even seeing them come close. The Cubs were atrocious in the 70s and 80s. Like, you're talking about us over a century, and they won. And they figured out a way to do it. They finally rose to the occasion. They built around a great young core. The Leafs have a great young core. They do. They just do. They figured it out. 108 years, the weight of Wrigleyville on that team's shoulders. They won. I watched it live. I couldn't believe it. I actually cried. I got like emotional. I don't give a shit about the Chicago Cubs, but it was just like, oh my God. Like, I think everybody outside of Cleveland was cheering for the Cubs because it was like, oh my God, they're going to do it. They're going to end this.
Yeah.
And the Leafs will eventually do the same thing.
Yeah.
But they got to figure this out. Want it.
As a Red Sox fan, when they finally, they won in 04, but when they beat the Yankees to get to the World Series in 04, the historic down 3 games to none, Kevin Millar, talking before the game, don't let us win tonight. You let us win tonight, we're not gonna lose the rest of the series. You kept on saying, put us away, put us out of our misery tonight, sweep us, and they didn't, and they clawed their way back into that, and ended up, I think it was the Angels. I want to say they beat the Angels in the World Series. But the party in Boston just after they beat the Yankees, they didn't even win the World Series. They beat, like, people died. Like,
it was a little over the top.
Yeah,
but same thing,
year,
right?
Next year, one of the most things I'm looking forward to the most, as obviously, I wouldn't say much bigger Sabres fan, but Sabres, they're the reason I fell in love with hockey. I played it throughout my life. I coached, like. The potential of this city getting both the Sabres and the Bills in the playoffs for the first time since, was it 96? Let's see, 96.
Pretty damn good.
Got to be.
The fact that that's going to happen, I am very confident it's going to happen. Wow. This city might fucking blow a gasket, especially if the both teams make a run and make runs. I'm not saying they both have to win championships. They both make runs. Like, you want to talk about what we had at Party in the Plaza back in 05, 06, 07. Mind you, we were, I was burning. I showed up with like the jerseys and pictures of Danny Heatley, Spezza, Alfredson, and we burned them we literally set them on fire in the middle of Alumni Plaza. Shout out Mark Lucarelli. We did it. And we almost got kicked out of the plaza.
Did you get arrested? Like, what are we doing here?
Party in the plaza, surrounded by thousands of people.
But that's what you put up with the pain for, right?
And I'm so
for the thrill of winning
to have that back again.
Yeah,
100%. That's why you put up with it, man.
Winning always fixes everything, but the fact that we have a leadership group now that takes it so seriously on and off the ice, from fan engagement to what's happening on the ice, you couldn't be more excited about the direction of this team. And for the first time, going back to one of the first, comments Walt made, to start the show off, the fact that we can have this much faith in our leadership group for both teams is overwhelming, and I cannot wait to see what's to come next year. As we watch these playoffs, to think that this is going to be us next year, 10,000 fucking raging fans outside of the arena, a sold out barn,
It's the best.
Not the pom-poms, I don't care. The yellow, blue, black, and red pom-poms, whatever. I don't care. Just get me It's so much fun. And we started that shit. It was us. You see it happen. It was us. We were the ones that started that. And I can't wait to get back to it.
Yeah,
man. That's I even if it's
Duane's pushing his internet to the limit right now.
I think I heard about 7 words of that,
God.
but I felt
Hurls,
it.
you better,
I felt
you better fly back to Buffalo.
I will. I was going to this year. I was going to say you push your internet to the limit there. I felt the emotion of it, and everything came through, which was nice. I actually I have a hockey game coming up in about an hour and a half. I got to play tonight. I'm backstopping a team I used to play for, so I do have to get out of here. But we'll probably lose you again anyway. So. What's that? I think we lost him.
I think he's gone.
He made
it
to the bitter end. He made it to the bitter end.
Duane,
guys, it was a pleasure. Hey, thanks for doing this.
Hey, nice meeting both of you, to be honest. Followed you guys for a long time, and it was really cool to talk some shop here, and maybe we will throughout free agency in the summer or the draft or whatever. But this was a lot of fun. Duane, are you still there? You want to say goodbye? He's not there.
He's trying. He's trying his best.
He's not there. Well, I gotta go. So nice talking to you guys. And
all right, thank you.
Enjoy the playoffs.
Cheers, fellas.
We'll see you soon.
Can you hear me?
See it.
Hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?